The sea was quieter that morning, as if it had learned how to whisper instead of roar. Fog clung to the air in long, trembling ribbons, soft and silver, brushing across the shore until even the horizon seemed to disappear. The world felt smaller inside that mist, contained, weightless, waiting. I stood barefoot on the deck, a mug of coffee cooling in my hands. The wood beneath my feet was damp with salt and dew, and when I breathed, I could taste the ocean. Everything smelled like quiet beginnings. Wood smoke, seaweed, distant rain. Behind me, the house slept. It was the only house on this side of the cove, white-painted and weather-worn, its long glass windows catching the slow light. The tide would rise later and reach the bottom of the dunes, licking the steps, but for now, it just whispered its soft threats. I'd always loved that sound, the ocean pretending to leave, only to return again. 2 years ago, this house was falling apart. I found it by accident driving down the coast the night I was told not to come home. I remember the sign, "For sale, needs work." Something in those 2 words felt like an invitation. The real estate agent didn't bother to hide her doubt when I walked through it. "It's a project," she warned, as if I hadn't already spent my whole life being one. But I saw through the decay, through the rotting planks and the leaking roof, and into something that felt alive. There was space here for silence. There was space for me. I spent the first night sleeping on the floor, surrounded by paint cans and old newspapers, listening to the wind knock gently at the broken windows. The next morning I started cleaning, then sanding, then painting. Every piece of it knew my hands. The railings, the counters, the frames. Some days I worked until my palms bled. Some days I just sat by the window and cried for no reason except that no one could hear me. But with every day that passed, I became more like the house, stronger, steadier, filled with light I didn't know I still had. By the time the walls were painted, the storms inside me had quieted too. I never meant for anyone to see it. The beach house wasn't meant to prove anything. It was supposed to be my ending place, the one corner of the world where their voices couldn't reach. But peace has a strange way of finding you just before the past does. Last night, as the wind rattled the windows and the sea moaned against the shore, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Claire, family group chat. I opened it out of habit. Not hope. The message said, "Reunion weekend. Beach house rental confirmed. Can't wait to see everyone." Attached was a photo. My house. The porch, the white shutters, even the seashell wreath I'd made last spring. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. Then I realized what had happened. My sister, of course it was Claire, had found the listing from when I briefly rented it out over winter to pay property taxes. She must have booked it without even looking at the owner's name. I stared at the photo for a long time, my heart tight but strangely calm. There it was, the full circle I never asked for. The house they told me I didn't belong in, now standing under my name. The family that had banned me from their reunion last year, now walking straight into my peace without knowing whose it was. I laughed. Quietly, almost kindly. Not out of mockery, just disbelief at how life folds itself. I remember the night they banned me. It was supposed to be my turn to host. I'd been planning it for weeks. Food, decorations, everything. But when the night came, I received a message from my mother instead of a knock on the, door. She said there had been a change of plans, that it was for the best if I didn't come this year, that some people still felt uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. That was her word for it. That's what she called the night I finally told them I was done being the family's apology. It had started over something small, a comment, a dismissal, the usual pattern. My father's silence, Claire's superiority, my mother's exhaustion dressed as care. I remember shouting for the first time, telling them how small they made me feel. I told them I wasn't going to keep pretending everything was fine. I told them that love shouldn't have to hurt to count. That was the last time they saw me. And they decided that was enough. I sip my coffee now, staring at the fog as it begins to lift. The tide is creeping closer, foamy and bright, the same way it always does. I wonder if they'll recognize it when they see it. If the shape of this place will stir something they buried long ago. There's a photograph on the mantel inside, the only one I kept. It's of all of us from years ago when laughter came easily. I'm 12 in the picture, standing between my parents with my arm around Claire. The wind is blowing my hair across my face, but I'm smiling like I believed we'd stay that way forever. I framed it not because it made me happy, but because it reminded me how long I waited for peace from people who never learned how to give it. Now, I have the peace. And they have the weekend reservation. I sit down on the porch steps, letting the morning sun touch my skin through the fading fog. It feels fragile, like something trying to remember warmth. Part of me still aches. The part that wanted to be invited, wanted to be chosen. But another part, the deeper part, feels ready. I don't plan to confront them. I don't plan to humiliate or reveal anything. I'll just let life do what it always does. Reveal truth through silence. They'll arrive tomorrow. They'll unpack their bags, pour their wine, and laugh about old stories. They'll walk through rooms that once held my tears, cook in a kitchen I built, and sit at a table I sanded until my arms ached, and maybe, just maybe, they'll feel it. The weight of what they once called too much, now holding the roof above their heads. The fog thins and the horizon sharpens again, the faint line between sea and sky becoming visible. A small gull cries overhead, darting across the gray light. I close my eyes, letting the sound wrap around me. The ocean is still whispering its soft secret, that everything we lose comes back, not to punish, but to remind. Tomorrow, my family will walk into the home I built from my loneliness. And I will stand here, not to stop them, not to forgive them yet, but to see how silence looks on their faces. Sometimes, peace isn't an ending. It's a mirror. By noon the next day, the fog had lifted completely. The ocean was glass, still bright, pretending to be calm. I stood on the hill above the house, half hidden by the dune grass, watching sunlight flicker off the windows I'd once scrubbed until they shone. The driveway below began to fill with sound. Tires crunching on gravel, car doors slamming, the sharp laughter that always made me feel like an echo. They were here, my family. The people who had taught me to make myself small so they could feel comfortable. The air smelled like sunscreen and expensive perfume, like nostalgia dressed up to look like healing. Claire stepped out first. Of course. Always the first, always the leader, the one who thought confidence could hide cruelty. She was wearing white because she always did at family gatherings, her version of purity, of poise. She looked around, hands on hips, taking in the house as if she'd chosen it from a magazine. "Oh my God," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet. "This place is perfect." Behind her came my mother, moving slower than I remembered. Her hair, once silver only at the temples, had turned almost completely gray. She carried a cooler in one hand, her purse in the other, balancing both like she'd been carrying too much her whole life. My father followed, silent as usual. He looked smaller, thinner. I wondered if he still listened more to silence than to people. And then there were the others, cousins, partners, their laughter overlapping like waves crashing out of rhythm. All of them walking into the home I had built from the wreckage they left behind. I crouched lower, hidden behind the dune. I hadn't planned to watch, but there was something magnetic about seeing them step across that threshold. The front door creaked open. I knew that sound. I had oiled the hinges a dozen times, but they always found a way to sing. Claire gasped when she stepped inside. "Look at this kitchen. It's stunning." She ran her fingers along the counter I had sanded for hours, smoothing out every imperfection. My father smiled faintly, setting a bag down near the table. "Feels peaceful here," he murmured. He didn't know he was speaking to me. I almost smiled. Almost? It's strange, the way a house can hold echoes. Every corner had its own ghost. Me, scraping paint, humming to myself through exhaustion. Me, sitting on the floor crying quietly because the plumbing had burst. Me standing in the doorway the first night it finally smelled like home. They walked right through all of it, laughing. But the house remembered. As they explored, I found myself drifting back. Not to the day they banned me, but the one after. I'd woken up that morning feeling hollow. There was no sound except the refrigerator humming and the faint rustle of the curtains. I'd sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone. No messages. No apologies. Just silence that filled every room like smoke. I remember walking outside and sitting on the steps watching the street. The cars that passed by seemed to belong to another world, one where people had families who didn't erase them. That was when I decided. Not to get revenge, not to prove them wrong, but to stop begging for a seat at a table that had already been cleared of me. That decision had saved me. And now, watching them through those wide glass windows, I realized how far away that version of me had gone. From my hiding place, I saw my mother walk into the living room. She paused by the mantel, the one where I'd set the photo. I could almost feel the air tighten even from here. Her hand lifted slowly, tracing the edge of the frame. She didn't speak. My father came up beside her, and when he saw it, his expression changed. It wasn't shock. It was something heavier. Recognition, maybe. Or regret. Claire's voice carried from the kitchen. "Mom, do you think this is the same beach we came to when we were kids? It kind of looks like it." Her mother's answer was soft, almost lost in the sound of the waves. "I think it is." They stood there for a moment too long, staring at a picture of the very girl they had told to stay away. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not satisfaction, but something smaller. Sadness, maybe. A quiet ache that comes from realizing people only notice your absence when they trip over it. I stayed there for hours, watching. They unpacked, cooked, laughed. My cousins played cards in the living room. My father grilled fish on the porch. And Claire took selfies with the ocean behind her, tagging them all. Family time. Charch Beach weekend. The irony was almost holy. When the sun began to set, the light turned gold across the dunes. The windows of the house glowed warm, like it was alive. They didn't know I was sitting only a few hundred feet away, watching the silhouettes move through the light I had built for myself, and yet, something in me softened. They looked smaller in there. Not cruel, not monstrous, just human. Flawed, confused, pretending. For the first time, I saw them not as villains, but as people stuck in their own stories. That didn't excuse the pain. But it explained the distance. As the night fell, I walked closer. The air was cooler now, tinged with salt and the faint scent of the barbecue. I stopped near the edge of the porch, hidden by the shadows of the dunes. I could hear their voices, soft, nostalgic. They were telling old stories. Ones I wasn't in anymore. "Remember that summer Lena tried to surf?" Claire said, laughing. "She fell off like 5 times and swore the ocean hated her." The table erupted in laughter, but my mother's voice broke through the noise, gentle, tired. "She wasn't that bad," she said. Her tone was protective, wistful even. She just wanted to belong. The laughter died. Silence rippled through the room like a tide pulling back. I turned away before I could feel the tears sting my eyes. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the truth inside them. On the walk back up the hill, I thought about how strange healing can look from the outside. Sometimes it's rebuilding, sometimes it's walking away, and sometimes it's standing outside the window of your own life, realizing you no longer need to be invited in. I paused halfway up, turning back one last time. Through the big front window, I could see them all sitting together. Claire leaning on her husband's shoulder. My father smiling faintly. My mother staring at the photo again. The wind shifted, carrying their laughter to me, softer this time, almost fragile. For the first time, I didn't wish to be there. For the first time, I was glad I wasn't. The house didn't need to know who owned it. The ocean didn't care who was forgiven. And I didn't need to prove that I was worth staying for. That night, I lit a small lantern near the dunes, the one I used when I stayed here alone. Its light flickered in the dark, a quiet pulse against the vast sea. It wasn't a beacon for them. It was a reminder for me that I had survived the silence they built, and that somehow felt enough. That night, the moon rose heavy and gold, hanging low over the ocean like it wanted to listen. The air was still, heavy with the scent of salt and the faint sweetness of dune grass. Waves whispered up the sand, brushing the shore in long, rhythmic sighs. I couldn't sleep. I hadn't expected to. Not with my family asleep just a few dunes away, inside the house that used to hold my loneliness. I sat on the cold sand, knees pulled to my chest, watching the windows glow faintly in the distance. From where I sat, it almost looked like a lantern floating above the water, fragile and warm. I could hear faint laughter now and then, drifting through the night, but it didn't hurt anymore. It sounded small, like something from a dream that no longer belonged to me. The tide was creeping closer. I could feel it lick the edge of my blanket. Each time it touched, it felt like a question. "Are you ready to let it go yet?" I didn't answer. I just watched. Around midnight, the house went quiet. Lights off. Shadows still. Only the sound of the waves remained. A soft, steady breathing that matched my own. Something inside me whispered to go. Not toward them, but toward the house. Just once. To see it, not from a distance, but from the porch. To stand where I used to stand when I believed I'd never belong anywhere. So I walked, barefoot, slow. The sand was cool beneath my feet, the wind lifting my hair like it wanted to remind me I was real. When I reached the steps, the old porch creaked under my weight. I could see my reflection faintly in the dark window, tired eyes, wind-tangled hair, a woman who had built a home for her own silence. The front door was locked, of course. I didn't try to open it. I just stood there, fingers brushing the frame, feeling the old wood that once knew my touch. Then I saw it. A small folded piece of paper, caught under the seashell I kept by the railing. A note. My heartbeat slowed as I reached for it. The handwriting was familiar, careful, slanted. My mother's, it read, "We didn't know. We shouldn't have shut you out. The house feels like you. I wish we'd listened sooner, that was all." No apology that tried to rewrite the past. Just honesty, stripped of performance. I sat down on the step, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. For the first time in years, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but space for it to live when it was ready. I thought about leaving the note there, pretending I hadn't seen it. But that would have been the old me, the one who needed them to guess what she felt. So I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small card, one I'd carried for years without knowing why. It was a plain piece of stationery, pale blue, with my name embossed faintly at the top. Lena Caldwell. I wrote 3 lines. I'm glad you liked the house. Take care of each other. The door doesn't need to open again for peace to come in. I folded it carefully, tucked it inside the mailbox by the steps, and slipped the keys inside beside it. The same keys that had once meant safety, then solitude, then strength. As I turned to leave, the porch light flickered once, a tiny pulse of gold. I'd replaced that bulb a dozen times when I lived here. It always flickered when the wind shifted from the sea. It felt like the house was saying goodbye. I walked back toward the shoreline, the note still warm in my pocket. The tide was higher now, curling around my ankles, carrying pieces of seaweed and broken shells. The moon hung straight above me, huge and white, bright enough to paint silver paths across the water. I stood there a long time, letting the waves soak my dress, watching them take pieces of the sand away one grain at a time. It struck me how quietly erosion happens, not with violence, but with patience. That's what healing had been for me. Not sudden, not loud. Just slow, persistent, like the sea undoing years of stone. Behind me, the house stood still, silhouetted against the moonlight. Somewhere inside, my family was sleeping. Maybe dreaming. Maybe remembering. I wondered if my mother had cried when she wrote that note. I wondered if my father had known whose roof he stood beneath, or if Claire had realized she was cooking in her sister's kitchen. It didn't matter now. They had walked into my life without knowing. And I had let them. Without hate, without vengeance, without needing to be seen. That, I realized, was the difference between pain and peace. Pain wants to be witnessed. Peace just wants to exist. I stayed there until the horizon began to pale. That fragile hour when night exhales and the world forgets to breathe. The first blush of dawn touched the waves, and for a moment, the whole ocean looked like it was catching fire. I thought about the years I spent trying to be invited in, to every conversation, every secret, every version of belonging they built without me. And now, standing on this sand, I saw the truth I had missed. I was never meant to fit into their story. I was meant to write my own. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of salt and new light. My hair whipped around my face, sticking to my lips. I let out a small laugh, the kind that feels more like breathing than joy. Then I bent down, picked up a smooth white shell, and wrote one word in the wet sand with my fingertip. Free. The next wave came and washed it away instantly. But that was the point. Freedom doesn't need proof. It just needs to be felt. As the sun rose, I turned and started walking down the beach. The light stretched across the water, gold and endless. I didn't look back at the house again. It had served its purpose. It had held me when I needed walls, and it had held them when I needed distance. Now it could belong to whoever needed it next. By the time I reached the edge of the dunes, the sound of gulls had returned, sharp and alive. The morning air was cool and clean, and the world felt wide again. I whispered a quiet thank you to no one and everyone, to the sea, to the house, to the silence that had rebuilt me piece by piece. And then I walked on, barefoot, unhurried, the waves chasing my footprints until they disappeared behind me. I didn't need to know where I was going. All that mattered was that this time, I was walking forward, not away, not toward, just forward. The ocean was still whispering its same soft word, over and over like a secret too gentle to keep. It said, "You're free now, Lena.